The rain had been steady all morning, one of those gray London downpours that makes the city seem suspended in time. I was seated opposite Hercule Poirot in our shared sitting room at Whitehaven Mansions, stirring my tea absent-mindedly when the envelope arrived, not by postman nor footman, but slipped soundlessly under our door like a whisper in the fog. No markings, no seal, just heavy vellum folded once, like a final page waiting to be turned. Poirot, who had been rearranging his desk blotter with maddening precision, picked it up, and for a long moment said nothing. Then his eyes narrowed, not in irritation, but in focus. "Hastings," he murmured, holding it up to the lamplight. "It is not what is on the page, but what is pressed beneath it." He tilted it toward me, and I saw then what he meant. There was no ink, no visible writing, but the faintest impressions, lines of text pushed into the paper from behind. Poirot fetched a graphite stick from his drawer, rubbed it gently across the surface, and slowly a message emerged, line by line. "Monsieur Poirot, there has been no crime, only a silence too heavy to ignore. My sister vanished 3 nights ago, and no one will listen, not even the police. They believe she has simply gone away. I believe she has been taken, not by man, but by memory itself. Please come before she is forgotten completely. You will find me at Wellingford House. Evelyn Wellingford." Poirot didn't speak for some time. He merely studied the letter as if it were breathing. "A message written without ink," I finally said, trying to fill the silence. "That's rather theatrical." Poirot nodded faintly. "Yes, but this is not performance. It is restraint. Someone is afraid, but not of what happened. Afraid of what still lives inside that house." I frowned. "But surely, if her sister's gone missing, the police would act?" "That, mon ami," he said, rising and reaching for his coat, "is precisely why we must go." We arrived at Wellingford House just as the sky cracked open with a fresh wave of rain. The manor stood on the outskirts of Hampstead Heath, flanked by wind-torn trees and silence so thick it felt almost rehearsed. A house out of time. Its windows glinted like eyes too tired to cry. It did not welcome visitors, it tolerated them. Lady Evelyn Wellingford greeted us at the door with a composed grief that was more chilling than any outburst. She was in her 30s, dressed in muted navy, her posture too perfect to be natural. The lines beneath her eyes told us what she wouldn't. "Thank you for coming," she said simply, as if she hadn't just claimed her sister had been swallowed by silence itself. She led us into a sitting room, dark, velvet drapes half drawn, a fire trying too hard to live in the hearth. Poirot declined the tea offered by the silent maid and went straight to the matter. "Madam," he said gently, "when was your sister last seen?" 3 nights ago," Evelyn replied. "We had supper together in the drawing room. She retired early, said she had a headache. I didn't think anything of it. The next morning, she was gone, her room untouched, her coat still in the wardrobe, but the back door was unlocked." I tilted my head. "And there were no signs of disturbance? Struggle? A note?" "None," she said. "But it's the house, Monsieur Poirot. Something is wrong with it. The staff keep leaving. The air has changed. I hear things." "So did she." Poirot's brow lifted. "What sort of things?" Evelyn hesitated, then looked down at her hands. "Footsteps at night, a whisper beneath the music-room floor, and once a voice, very faint, calling from behind the library wall." I exchanged a glance with Poirot. This was no longer a missing person case. It was a house with secrets. "And your husband?" Poirot asked. She looked up sharply. "My husband is dead. Ambrose died 3 years ago in that very room." There was a long pause. Poirot's voice was careful when he next spoke. "And do you believe your sister's disappearance is connected to his death?" Evelyn stood, moved to the window, and looked out over the gardens, slick with rain. "I believe nothing stays buried in this house. Not secrets, and certainly not the past." Poirot straightened. "Then, Lady Evelyn, we shall begin. We will speak to the staff, examine your sister's room, and, if you permit, your late husband's." She turned slowly. "Permit it? Monsieur Poirot, I beg it." As she left us alone in the corridor, Poirot adjusted his cuffs, his voice low. Hastings, I suspect this house has been telling stories long before either sister ever arrived. Let us see which chapters were torn out, and why. And with that, we stepped into Wellingford House's silence, a silence waiting to be broken. Wellingford House revealed itself slowly, as though testing our presence, with each creaking floorboard and whispering draft. It was a house that had known opulence, yes, but also something quieter. Decay not just of wood and stone, but of memory. As Lady Evelyn led us through the hall toward her sister's chambers, Poirot moved deliberately, pausing at each faded portrait and darkened doorway, as though each space held its own confession. The violet room, Imogen's room, as Evelyn explained, was at the far end of the east wing. She liked the quiet, Evelyn said softly. Said the west wing was too full of echoes. She handed Poirot the key, though the door stood ajar. Inside, the air was stale and faintly sweet, like pressed lavender left too long in a drawer. The curtains had not been opened in days, and the fireplace was cold. But nothing was out of place, no scattered belongings, no sign of hasty departure. The bed was neatly made. A small silver hand mirror rested beside a closed book of poetry on the nightstand. Tennyson. Break, break, break. Poirot scanned the room in silence, then stepped toward the wardrobe. You said her coat was here? He asked. Evelyn opened the doors to reveal an untouched row of garments. The gray wool. Bottom right. Poirot knelt and ran his fingers over the hem. Dry. Not worn recently. And no boots missing. Evelyn shook her head. No. Poirot rose, stepped to the window, and unlatched the frost-stiff panes. Outside, the grounds were slick with rain and fog, the garden statue, an angel missing one hand, barely visible. There are no footprints, not even a disturbed hedge, he murmured. It is as though she evaporated. I've told the police, Evelyn said, her voice trembling. They insist she left on her own, that she simply wandered off. And you do not believe that? She shook her head firmly. Imogen was unsettled lately, yes, but not careless. She wouldn't disappear without a note. Not after what happened to Ambrose. Poirot turned sharply. Then let us discuss your late husband. You said he died in the house. Yes, in the music room. She hesitated, as though the words cost her something. 3 years ago. A heart attack, they said, but it was sudden. He wasn't even 40. Poirot folded his hands. And your sister, was she close with him? A silence followed. Close in proximity, Evelyn said finally, but not in feeling. She admired him, I think. But there was tension. They'd argue, often late at night. Poirot raised an eyebrow. About what? I never asked. Her eyes darted briefly toward the corridor. I didn't want to know. Poirot said nothing more. He moved to the writing desk and opened its drawers gently. Inside was only one letter, unsent, addressed simply Ambrose. The handwriting was Imogen's, delicate, almost childlike. Poirot didn't read it aloud, but his expression darkened slightly. She loved him, he murmured, or believed she did. He tucked the letter into his pocket. Madam, one final question. Has anything changed in this house since the day she vanished? Evelyn hesitated. One thing. The music room door. Poirot turned slowly. Yes. It creaks now, she whispered. It never used to. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Lead me there, if you please. Moments later, we stood in the music room, dimly lit, grand, and suffocatingly silent. The piano sat closed beneath a white dust sheet. Above the mantel hung a portrait of Ambrose, painted in shadow and oil, his expression unreadable. Poirot approached the piano and slowly ran his fingers across its surface. Has anyone touched this since the night he died? He asked. No, Evelyn whispered. It's been left exactly as it was. Poirot lifted the sheet. Dust puffed into the air, but only on the back half of the cover. The keys were clean, recently touched. Hastings, he said softly. Someone has played this piano within the last 48 hours. Evelyn turned pale. No one should have. Poirot looked to her. Yet someone did. Someone who walks these halls still, not as a ghost, but as a memory desperate to be heard. And then, in the distance, faint but unmistakable, a soft creak. The sound of the music room door, slowly closing behind us. The music room door had moved, but there was no breeze. No draft to blame. Just that slow, deliberate creak, the kind that suggests intention more than accident. Evelyn froze, her hands clenched at her sides. Poirot did not flinch. Instead, he turned calmly toward the door, his eyes scanning the hallway beyond with surgical precision. "Remain here, Hastings," he said quietly. "And, madam, if you would be so kind, do not move anything." He stepped through the door and into the dim corridor beyond. I followed without waiting for permission. The hall was empty. Faint sconces flickered against wood-paneled walls. Old portraits gazed down with the weight of a family that had forgotten how to forget. Somewhere deeper in the house, a grandfather clock ticked, too slow, as if reluctant to keep time. Poirot moved with careful steps, his polished shoes silent against the threadbare runner. Then he stopped. "Hastings, look." A faint smear, just along the baseboard. A scuff of earth, like someone had brushed past in boots damp with garden soil. "It's fresh," Poirot murmured. "But notice, it veers toward the service wing." We followed the trail, subtle as breath, until it disappeared at a narrow side door. Poirot reached for the handle, but paused. "Listen." From the other side, soft footsteps retreated. Too light for a man, too heavy for a child. Poirot swung the door open, and we stepped into the cold utility hall. At the far end, just before the stairwell turned, a shadow slipped out of sight. "Who's there?" I called out, instinct taking over. No answer. Poirot picked up pace. The back stairwell curved downward toward the cellar, the stone steps slick from years of damp. The scent of mold thickened with every step. We reached the bottom and found nothing but an old coal room, crates of preserves, and a rusted wine cabinet. "It would be foolish," Poirot said calmly, "to assume the figure was Imogen. But it was someone familiar with this house, someone who knows how to vanish within it." Back upstairs, Evelyn met us with wide eyes. "It wasn't Imogen," Poirot said before she could speak, "but someone is moving through your home unnoticed." Evelyn exhaled sharply. "The staff, most of them left last year. Only Clara remains. She was Imogen's maid. Then we shall speak with her." We found Clara in the linen room, folding bedsheets with quiet, practiced movements. She was in her mid-30s, with clever eyes that never quite looked at you directly. She greeted us with polite reserve. She spoke of music, Poirot said. "Miss Imogen, did she often come down to the music room?" Clara hesitated. "Not for years. After Mr. Wellingford passed, she stopped. Said the piano didn't sound right anymore." Poirot leaned forward. "But it was played recently." "I wouldn't know," Clara said too quickly. "And the back stairwell. You've used it today." "No, sir." Poirot paused. "Clara, have you seen Miss Imogen since she vanished?" Clara's fingers tightened around the linen. "No." There was a silence, thick as syrup. "But," she added quietly, "I think someone has." We both leaned in. "Who?" She glanced around. "Rupert." Poirot's eyes flashed. "The late Ambrose's brother?" Clara nodded. "He's returned." Quietly. "Lady Evelyn doesn't know. But I saw him. In the orchard at dusk. Watching the house." Poirot straightened slowly. "And did Imogen know he was coming?" "I don't think she ever forgave him. Not after what happened to her sister." That stopped me. "Sister?" "But Imogen and Evelyn." Clara hesitated. "There was a third. Madeline. Died when she was 13. An accident, they said. But Rupert was blamed. He disappeared soon after. I only know because, well, Imogen sometimes spoke to her, as if she were still here." Poirot's face darkened. "This house does not just echo the past, Clara. It rewrites it, piece by piece." He turned to me. "We must find Rupert Wellingford. And when we do, I believe we shall find the truth, not only of Imogen's disappearance, but of what this house has tried so very hard to bury." By morning, the sky hung low over Wellingford like a lid clamped tight, trapping every breath and every secret. A brittle frost coated the garden walls, turning the hedges to glass and the orchard trees into frozen skeletons. Poirot, after a near-silent breakfast of soft eggs and dark tea, requested we walk the grounds. He carried his cane, not for necessity, but as an extension of his thoughts, a silent metronome to the rhythm of his suspicions. "I do not trust the silence of this place, Hastings," he murmured. "It listens too carefully." We passed the eastern terrace, its stone lion heads rimmed in moss, and entered the orchard. The trees were spaced irregularly, their trunks gnarled, their roots buckling the ground beneath. Near the center, a low bench sat beneath a blackthorn tree, dusted in frost, and beside it, faint but certain footprints. Not the kind left by servants on routine, but deeper, firmer, recent. Poirot knelt, examining the ground with reverence. Boots. Men's. Broad, but not worn carelessly. Someone accustomed to silence. He stood and followed the prints as they veered toward a crumbled corner of the garden wall, where ivy draped like a veil. There, just beyond the gate, half obscured by overgrowth, was a narrow trail that curved down toward the woods. Poirot stopped. Rupert Wellingford came this way, and he did not wish to be seen. We returned to the house, and Poirot requested Lady Evelyn's company in the drawing-room. She entered hesitantly, a shawl wrapped tightly over her shoulders, her expression wary. "Lady Evelyn," Poirot began gently, "you have not mentioned your brother-in-law." She blinked, then lowered her gaze. "Rupert is not a topic in this house." "Because of Madeline?" Evelyn stiffened. Poirot waited, then continued. "He has returned, you know. Clara saw him. In the orchard." A silence. Then, "I feared he might. When Imogen vanished, I thought perhaps he had come for her." "Because they were close?" Evelyn shook her head slowly. "No, because they shared a guilt neither could name. He was a boy when Madeline died, 12, maybe 13. They said he pushed her. She fell from the East Tower stairs. But Imogen, she was the one who saw it, and she never spoke. Not then. Not to anyone." Poirot's brow furrowed. "So the truth of that day died in silence." Evelyn nodded. "But silence, madam," Poirot said softly, "has a way of echoing." Later that day, we ventured to the East Tower. The stairwell was narrow, its banister warped, its windows long boarded shut. At the third landing, Poirot paused, his hand brushing the wall. "Feel this," he said. I reached out. The plaster was cracked and cold, colder than the air, as if something had been recently disturbed. Poirot pressed the wall lightly, and it gave, just slightly. A hidden panel. Behind it, a cavity, no larger than a cupboard. Inside, an old wool shawl, faded to green, and a child's leather shoe. Poirot took them out gently. "These were not forgotten," he said. "They were hidden, and the person who hid them could not bear to let go." That night, just past midnight, we heard it again, a sound low and trembling, like a hum carried through stone. It was the piano. We hurried to the music room, the lantern shaking in my hand. The room was dark, the keys untouched. But the sound continued, not notes, but something like humming, from beyond the far wall. Poirot moved quickly, crossing to the bookcase. He ran his hands along the spines, then stopped. One shelf rattled. "A false wall," he said, "and behind it, something that has not wanted to be found." We pried it open, revealing a narrow crawlspace, and inside, nestled among dust and silence, lay a small trunk. Poirot opened it slowly. Inside, a bundle of letters bound in red ribbon, all addressed to M. All unsigned, all written in a young girl's hand. He read aloud. "You said you would catch me, but you let me fall. You said the stairs were a game, but I never reached the bottom." Poirot's eyes closed briefly. Madeline's letters, written after her death, or by someone who believed she spoke through them. "Imogen," I whispered. He nodded. "And now, Hastings, now I fear the truth may be too sharp to carry much longer." Because beneath the letters, beneath the dust, was a photograph. 3 children, Madeline, Imogen, and Rupert, and the corner had been torn, the part that showed the face of the 4th. The morning settled over Wellingford Manor with a grim sort of stillness, as though the very air hesitated to move. Outside, a low fog clung to the garden like a veil, but inside, The silence had a different texture, thick with withheld truths and memories too fragile to name. Poirot stood by the window of the study, gently turning the torn photograph in his gloved hands, his gaze distant yet sharp. "There's a face missing from this image, Hastings," he murmured, his voice barely louder than the ticking of the clock behind him. "And that missing face, I believe, is the key to everything. One does not tear a memory without purpose. One removes what they cannot endure." Downstairs, the house moved with ritualistic civility. Servants dusted picture frames no one looked at. Lady Evelyn arranged flowers she didn't smell, and conversations fluttered like moths near a flame, careful never to land. Poirot requested the family photo albums, and Lady Evelyn, with clear reluctance, led us to the cabinet in the drawing room. The albums were worn at the corners, their leather cracked from years of handling, but Poirot moved through them not with haste, but with reverence. His fingertips hovered over each photograph until finally he stopped. A page had been torn. Another bore only a ghostly outline of a missing image. Yet beneath it, in faded script, the caption remained: "Summer Fate, 1921, M.R.I.T." Poirot looked up. "Who is T?" For a heartbeat, Evelyn's face was unreadable. Then, as if exhaling something held in for decades, she whispered, "Thaddeus. Thaddeus Whitcomb. My cousin. My father's sister's son. Why is he never spoken of?" Poirot's voice was quiet but unrelenting. "Because he vanished," she said, "after Madeleine died. Some said he ran away. Others said he lost his mind. He was strange. Quiet. Fixated on music, but never played. He followed Madeleine constantly. Like a shadow." She paused. "And Imogen," she stopped talking about him altogether. But she never said why. Poirot's eyes softened. So the silence began long before Imogen disappeared. And perhaps she was not just carrying the burden of one death, but two. He closed the album gently. "We must find Thaddeus." Locating a man who lived like a phantom proved difficult, but the village clerk, an old man with a fading memory and a whispery voice, remembered the name. "There was talk," he said, "of a boy gone wild. Went up to the old Fenwick cottage on the edge of the woods. Some say he never came back down." So we went. The woods were dense and tangled, the trees crowding close as if trying to keep their secrets in. The path wound past a moss-draped wall and narrowed into a trail barely wide enough for two. The Fenwick cottage appeared suddenly, hunched beneath blackened pines like something the forest had tried to swallow whole. The windows were thick with grime, but faint light glimmered inside. Poirot knocked once, then again. The door creaked open on its own, groaning like an old breath. Inside it was warm. A fire burned low in the hearth, casting long shadows across a room filled with dust and silence. In a high-backed chair sat a man with hollow cheeks and wild silver hair, Thaddeus Whitcomb. His robe was threadbare. His hands rested still on the armrests, but his eyes were startlingly lucid. "You've come too late," he said softly, not looking at us, but at the fire. Poirot stepped forward. "Too late for whom?" "For her," Thaddeus murmured. "For Imogen." "What do you mean?" Poirot asked, though his tone already suggested he feared the answer. "She came to me," Thaddeus said, his voice like dry leaves. 2 weeks ago. She said she remembered what happened the day Madeleine died. She remembered the staircase, the scream, the hand that let go. She told me it wasn't Rupert alone, that we all played that game, that we all let her fall." Poirot's expression didn't change, but I could feel the shift in the air. "And what did she want from you?" "She said she needed proof," Thaddeus replied. "The old letters, the ones Madeleine wrote before she stopped being real. Imogen asked me to meet her at the chapel. She said she was ready to speak the truth. But she never arrived," Poirot finished. Thaddeus nodded, his eyes glinting. "I waited all night. Then word came that she'd gone missing, that she vanished." Poirot turned abruptly. "Come, Hastings. Wellingford is not just haunted by the past. It is hiding something now, something beneath its floorboards, under its skin." As we left the cottage, the wind rustled the leaves in a sudden, eerie hush, and through that hush came a faint, broken sound, a single note from a piano, off-key and lingering. It echoed faintly behind us, as if the house we'd left behind had exhaled something long buried. It was the kind of note that plays when memory wakes. Wellingford Manor wore dusk like a mask, its windows catching only slivers of the dying sun, its corridors darkening not just with shadow, but with something heavier. That evening, Poirot did not rest. He paced the great hall with quiet intensity, glancing at the framed portraits that stared down in muted judgment. His cane tapped a rhythm that did not match the silence. I followed him through the house, down into the east corridor that led toward the sealed chapel. We had passed it before, an archway of dark oak, padlocked, and used since the final funeral years ago. This place, Poirot said, is not closed out of disuse, Hastings. It is closed out of guilt. He requested the key from Evelyn, who hesitated, but produced it from a drawer in her father's study, an old brass thing, cold to the touch. The moment the lock turned, the air changed. The chapel smelled of old hymns, dried flowers, and stone too long untouched by light. Dust hovered like memory, and every creak of the wooden floorboards beneath our feet sounded like a breath from the past. At the front was a dais, the pulpit draped in faded crimson. Behind it the altar, and beyond that, a wall that had once been painted with saints, now cracked and peeling. Poirot moved with purpose. His eyes scanned the side pews, the worn kneelers, the candle holders long forgotten. "Look there," he whispered. Behind the altar, a sliver of dark marble jutted at an unnatural angle. He stepped forward, reached behind it, and with a soft scrape, a panel came free. Hidden behind it, a compartment. Inside, carefully wrapped in oilcloth and string, lay a bundle of letters and one small, red leather diary. We took them to the drawing-room to read. The letters were unmistakably Madeline's, written in a delicate, slanted hand, postmarked only weeks before her death. Each one was more desperate than the last. They laugh, but it isn't a game. I hear steps at night. I feel watched. Imogen is too young to understand, but she's seen it too. Rupert says I'm imagining things, but he isn't the one who wakes screaming. The final letter, dated the night before her fall, was addressed simply, "To the one who finally listens." In it she wrote, "If anything happens to me, it will be blamed on my own despair. But know this, my hands were not the only ones on that banister. The house has secrets, but they were taught to it by the people inside it." Poirot turned the diary next. It belonged to Imogen. Her entries were scattered and brief, as though she had never intended for them to be read. He followed me again today. I didn't tell Evelyn. She would say I imagined it like Madeline did. But I know now. It's not Rupert I fear. And further down, nearly at the end, I've found the letters. I'm taking them to Thaddeus. He remembers too. I think I'll tell the truth. I'm done hiding. Poirot shut the diary gently. His eyes were clouded with something unreadable. She was ready, he whispered. Imogen was ready to name the past, and someone ensured she would vanish before she could. We sat in silence for a long while. Outside, the wind stirred the hedgerows. Somewhere within the house, a floorboard creaked of its own accord. Poirot finally rose. "It is no longer about whether Imogen left," he said. "It is about who needed her gone, and why." Just then, Lady Evelyn appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "You'd better come to the garden," she said. "There's something you'll want to see." We followed her through the manor's rear doors into the cold night air. A gardener's lantern flickered by the edge of the pond, where frost was beginning to grip the water's edge. A figure waited there, Mr. Briar, the groundskeeper. He pointed silently to the base of an old weeping willow. Something was caught in its roots, half buried in soil, slick with rain. Poirot knelt, brushing away the mud. It was a scrap of fabric, soft wool, faded lavender. Imogen's missing coat, and clutched within it, a broken locket, its face cracked, but still bearing the photograph we had seen before. This time, all four faces were visible. Madeline, Rupert, Imogen, and Thaddeus. But someone had scratched a line across one of them. Across Evelyn. Poirot rose slowly, his expression grim. "The story we've been told, Hastings," he said softly, "is not just missing pages. It has been rewritten entirely." The wind whistled low through the trees, as we stood in silence. And in that moment I understood. Wellingford Manor wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was haunted by survivors. Rain had returned to Wellingford by morning, soft, persistent, and as relentless as guilt. It threaded through the hedges, seeped into the stone, and echoed faintly against the manor's high windows, like the ticking of an invisible clock. The mood inside the house had shifted. Where once there had been caution, now there was tension, like a bowstring drawn too tight. Evelyn moved through the hallways like a ghost, avoiding every mirror. Rupert remained in his study, curtains drawn, pretending to read. And Poirot, he was still, uncharacteristically still, seated in the drawing-room with Imogen's diary open before him and Madeline's final letter resting atop a lace handkerchief. The silence around him was thick with thought. He did not speak for nearly an hour. When he finally rose, it was with slow precision, cane in hand, shoulders set. "Come, Hastings," he said quietly. "We shall speak with Evelyn. And this time, she will answer." We found her in her mother's sitting room, an elegant space choked with florals and porcelain birds. She sat beside a cold fireplace, fingers interlaced in her lap, eyes fixed on the dark window. "Did you find what you were looking for, Monsieur Poirot?" she asked, voice as calm as it was exhausted. "No," Poirot said, "but I found what you were hoping I would not." He placed the locket on the table between them, its cracked face gleaming faintly in the light. Evelyn did not look at it. "You scratched your face out," he continued. "Why?" "Because it was never supposed to be in that photograph," she said softly. "I wasn't there when it was taken. I inserted myself later. Father had it reprinted to make the family look whole. But it wasn't. Not ever." Poirot's gaze narrowed. "Why lie about that?" "Because it was easier to pretend," she said. "To be the sister, the good daughter, the one who never caused pain." "But you did cause pain," Poirot said gently. "Didn't you, Lady Evelyn?" There was a silence so deep it felt like the room itself had stopped breathing. "I didn't mean for her to fall," she whispered. "That day on the stairs, Madeline was screaming. She was hysterical, accusing Rupert, accusing everyone. Imogen had overheard her, and I tried to calm her. I grabbed her arm, but she pulled away. She slipped." Poirot didn't blink. "And you said nothing." "I was 17, Evelyn whispered, "and our mother had just died. Madeline was unraveling. Father said the scandal would kill us, so he said it was Rupert's fault, that he and Madeline had argued, that she jumped, and he let us, because he thought it would protect me." Poirot turned to the window, his voice cold now. "And Imogen?" "She remembered," Evelyn said. "Years later, she confronted me, said she'd tell the truth, that the whole family had blood on its hands, that she couldn't carry it anymore. I begged her not to, but she left for the chapel, said she'd already told Thaddeus, said she'd write it all down." "And so," Poirot said, turning slowly, "you followed her." Evelyn closed her eyes. "No, I didn't. That's the truth. I didn't hurt her. I swear. She never came home, and I thought someone else must have." Poirot stepped forward, voice sharp now. "You feared Thaddeus would speak." "Yes," she said, a tear finally falling. "He knew too much. He always watched. He remembered more than he let on. But he's not the one who made her disappear." Poirot leaned close. "Then who did?" Evelyn looked up at him. "I think she did." For a moment, I didn't understand. Poirot's expression didn't change. "What do you mean?" "I think Imogen ran," Evelyn said. "I think she vanished herself. To punish us. To let the house rot in silence. Because that's what we deserved." Poirot stood still, the gears behind his eyes still turning. Then, slowly, he looked toward the hallway, toward the long corridor that led back to the sealed chapel. "No," he said at last. "Imogen did not run. She left us something. A final note. And it is still here." We followed him down to the chapel once more, its silence as heavy as before. But this time, Poirot bypassed the altar and walked to the far wall, where candle sconces lined the stone. He reached behind the second one, his fingers finding something. A folded paper. It was stained, weather-worn, and sealed with a wax circle bearing the letter I. He opened it. To the one who listens, I am tired, not of living, but of pretending, of being the one who remembers while the rest of them forget. I do not hate them, but I do not forgive them. This house is built on too many lies. I cannot stay. If I leave, let them wonder why. Let them look inside, not out. Let them finally hear the echo that never stopped ringing. Poirot folded the letter slowly. She's not dead, Hastings. She's gone. Somewhere she can start again. Away from Wellingford. Away from the rot. We left the chapel in silence. Evelyn remained behind. She did not weep. She simply sat down in the front pew, as though waiting for someone who would never come home. A week passed, and with it the rain. The skies over Wellingford cleared, but the air remained heavy with what had been said, and what still lingered unsaid in the shadowed corners of the manor. Poirot had taken to long silences, seated by the study's window, with a cup of cooling tea and Madeline's final letter always within reach, as though he were still listening for something. I too felt it, the sense that something waited just outside our reach, a thread not yet pulled. The estate moved as if in mourning. Servants spoke in hushed tones. Rupert stayed locked away in his room, and Evelyn had stopped speaking altogether. That morning, as frost kissed the glass panes and fog rolled like breath across the hedges, a letter arrived at Whitehaven Mansions, forwarded from the village post. The envelope was plain, the handwriting unfamiliar, but when Poirot opened it, I watched his fingers tighten around the page with the reverence of someone holding something alive. It was from Imogen. To Monsieur Poirot. It began, I knew you would come. I left that letter in the chapel for you, not because I feared Evelyn, or Rupert, or even the truth, but because I needed someone to hear it and not turn away. You were right, I did not die. I chose to become someone else. I chose to stop bleeding for a house that never healed. You asked what I feared most. It wasn't being forgotten. It was being remembered only as a shadow of them. I am not a memory. I am still becoming. Please do not come looking for me. Let this ending remain intact. I forgive them all, but I will not return. I looked at Poirot. He closed the letter slowly and set it down beside the others. So it is done, I said. But Poirot shook his head. No, Hastings. It is only beginning. You see, there are two kinds of disappearances. One in which a person is taken, and another, far rarer, in which a person removes themselves, piece by piece, until only silence remains. Imogen has done the latter, and now it is Wellingford that must live with what remains. Later that afternoon, we walked the estate one last time. The pond had begun to freeze. The weeping willow leaned heavier than before. We paused beneath it, where the remnants of Imogen's coat had been found. Poirot removed his hat and stood quietly for a moment. Then he spoke, not to me, but to the wind. She is not your ghost, Wellingford. She is your reckoning. Inside the manor, Evelyn sat by the fire. The photograph now returned to its frame. Her image no longer scratched out, but neither whole. She looked up as we passed, and for a moment, her eyes did not plead. They understood. We left the estate in silence. The train pulled away from the village, just as the sun began to set, gold bleeding into gray. Poirot sat back, eyes closed, and said, Some truths, mon ami, do not require justice, only the courage to face them without flinching. And I thought of a girl in a gray coat, standing at the edge of a frozen chapel, choosing not to fall but to walk. Not a ghost, not a victim, but a woman finally stepping out of someone else's story, and into her own. Winter deepened as Wellingford retreated into silence, with Imogen's letter now resting in Poirot's archive, and the manor left to weather its own shame. One might have assumed the story complete, but something about the air in that old place refused to still. Closure, Poirot once told me, is not found in the facts of a case, but in the aftermath, in the way silence settles. And the silence left behind by Imogen was not the peaceful kind. It lingered, like a question half answered. A fortnight later, we received an invitation, unexpected, delicate, and handwritten in Evelyn's unmistakable script. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, your presence is requested at Wellingford for a gathering in remembrance of Imogen. There are things still to be said. Please come. When we returned, the estate looked much the same, aged, heavy with memory, but inside, something had shifted. The halls no longer felt like they were hiding. The portraits had been rehung, though not cleaned. The dust remained, as if to remind everyone that history is not so easily wiped away. In the drawing room, Evelyn stood near the hearth, no longer draped in the armor of silence. Rupert sat beside her, looking older, hollowed but present. The staff moved gently through the house, not avoiding the shadows, but accepting them. Poirot approached Evelyn slowly. "You've begun, I see." She nodded. "It's not a ceremony," she said. "Just acknowledgement. We were wrong, all of us. To hide, to twist, to let the past shape who we became." She loved this place, even as it broke her. There were flowers by the window, winter irises, soft and purple. Beside them sat Imogen's music box, the one found in her room, the melody now repaired. It played a single haunting tune, over and over, fragile but unbroken. "I wrote to her," Evelyn said, her voice catching. "I don't know if she'll ever read it, but I needed her to know. I remember. I always will." Poirot smiled faintly. "Remembrance, mademoiselle, is the first act of redemption." That evening, after the guests had gone, we remained in the library a final time. Poirot stood by the window, looking out over the frozen garden. "Do you believe she'll ever return?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, and that is not a tragedy. She left not to escape, but to become. Wellingford was her origin, not her prison. That is the distinction." He turned toward me, mustache solemn, eyes bright. "Some vanished to be found. Others vanished to be free." Outside, the wind had stilled. The pond glinted beneath the moonlight. In the chapel, the bell remained silent. And yet, as we left, I thought I heard something faint and distant. Not a chime, not a cry, but the softest sound of pages turning. The end, yes, but also the beginning of a new book. The weeks passed, and with them, the chill of that long Wellingford winter began to thaw, though its ghost lingered in the corners of our minds like the echo of a song unfinished. Life at Whitehaven Mansions had returned to its gentle rhythm. Breakfast at 8, letters at 9, and the morning papers folded precisely at Poirot's elbow. Yet despite the quiet, I could sense it in him, that subtle unrest, the kind that stirred not from unanswered questions, but from the knowledge that some stories are not solved. They are endured. Then, one quiet morning in late February, another envelope arrived. This one from Paris. No return address, no seal. But inside a photograph. Imogen, alive, smiling, seated beside a sunlit cafe table, her hair tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat, her eyes no longer shadowed by the weight of Wellingford. She looked directly into the camera, not surprised, not hiding, almost as if she knew exactly where this picture would end up. There was no note, only a single pressed iris between the pages. But Poirot didn't need more. He held the photograph for a long while, not speaking. Then finally he said, "She has chosen her ending." I looked at the image again. There was strength in her now, a stillness that hadn't been there before, the kind that came not from victory, but from having faced the truth and walked away standing. That afternoon, Poirot asked me to accompany him on one final walk through Kensington Gardens. We sat near the frozen pond, surrounded by the slow bloom of early crocuses and children feeding birds that never stayed in one place too long. "You see, Hastings," he began, "many believe that a mystery must always have resolution, a neat bow, a culprit, a punishment. But life, real life," he glanced at me, "it rarely grants such satisfaction. Some endings require us to live with ambiguity." "And justice?" I asked. "Justice," he said, "is not always a trial or a cell. Sometimes it is truth spoken aloud. Sometimes it is guilt lived with. And sometimes," his gaze drifted skyward, "justice is simply a woman choosing to vanish from the ruins, so the ruin no longer defines her." I nodded, watching a swan glide across the still water, its reflection nearly perfect. "Do you think Evelyn will ever forgive herself?" Poirot's smile was faint, sad, knowing. "In time, perhaps. But that is a journey she must walk alone, just as Imogen did. As the sun lowered over the city, turning everything golden, We rose and walked back toward home. And in that moment I understood. This was never a story about disappearance, nor even about death. It was about the choices we make in the silence between what we endure and what we reveal. About the cost of hiding and the courage of being seen. And somewhere far from Wellingford, a girl in gray was writing a new story. This time her own.